Welcome to Vibe Check, a series where I break down how and why the mechanics of your favorite games resonated with you emotionally. Today we're looking at The Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. There's a lot going on in this game, but I want to focus on two parts of it: exploration and experimentation. Let's start with exploration first. Before we talk about Tears of the Kingdom, though, we need to talk about Breath of the Wild for a minute. And this is important, so stick with me here. Breath of the Wild was an experience. If you didn't play it at release, it's hard to describe what it was like playing this for the first time back then. Everyone was on the same playing field. All we knew about the game was what Nintendo showed off in the trailers. And as soon as the clock ticked over to midnight on March 3rd, 2017, we all began on a journey together. It was so fascinating discovering everything the world had in store for us. Villages, quests, shrines, chests. Every little stone you overturned had something to offer, literally. The world was just so big, it felt like I could play for 100 hours and still miss out on a lot of stuff. Exploration played a big part in Breath of the Wild's success. How do you evoke that feeling of exploration in a sequel that uses the same world? Like, yeah, I said I could play Breath of the Wild for 100 hours and still miss out on a lot, but I've seen the majority at that point. So is that majority going to be the same in the sequel? Honestly, I wasn't too excited for Tears of the Kingdom before it came out. I knew I'd probably play it, but I wasn't foaming at the mouth like I was for Breath of the Wild. And more than anything, I think it came back to the fact that it took place in the same Hyrule and used the same overworld. Of course, I knew they'd change up a lot of the locations so they weren't exactly the same, but even then, it doesn't capture the magic of exploring a wholly new world. I was sure Kakariko and Hateno were going to be kinda different, but Dueling Peaks is still going to be there. The Great Plateau was still going to be a plateau, and all the different races were going to be in the same regions. There would be some new stuff, but not enough to keep me from getting bored of seeing mostly the same geography. I underestimated this game. I was too busy thinking about how boring it'd be to see the same places, but I didn't even realize how exciting it would be to see how everything's changed. This game takes place after an event called the Upheaval. A couple years after Calamity Ganon's defeat in Breath of the Wild, Hyrule Castle mysteriously rises from the ground. Ruins of an ancient civilization called the Zonai appear in the sky, and some of them even come crashing down. The world is in danger yet again, and it's up to you to help everyone. Let's stick with Kakariko. It didn't really have anything going on in Breath of the Wild, if I remember correctly. It's home to the Sheikah, and they just kind of exist. You're actually directed to it as soon as you finish the game's opening section, so it's mostly just to get you acclimated to the world. It's a quiet little town with not much going on. In Tears of the Kingdom, though, they've got some problems. Massive Zonai ruins fell on top of their town after the upheaval. It's so satisfying to see how that event affected their tiny village in the mountains and what everyone's up to now. Even in areas that weren't directly affected by the upheaval, it's cool to see how people have changed. There's maybe 3 to 5 years between this and Breath of the Wild, and that's a lot of time for big life events. Hudson and Ronson from Terrytown had a kid. It's wonderful to visit them after so long and observe the struggles they go through now compared to a couple years ago. I don't want to spend too much time on this section, as I'm definitely going to do a video game world tour of this game. Get subscribed to see that in the future. I just want to reiterate that the way they shifted your perspective on the world from Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom was beautiful. The wonder of seeing Kakariko Village for the first time and discovering what their little society is like in that game is replaced with the wonder of seeing how the upheaval affected them in this game. Experimentation. The second E. Let's go back to Breath of the Wild again and explore how that game handled player freedom. Much in a similar way that people were discovering the game's geography back in 2017, people were discovering just how much this game lets you experiment mechanically. Breath of the Wild is a game about systems and how you interact with them. Most of that interaction is done with the game's 4 main runes. Bombs, which are self-explanatory, Magnesis, which allows you to pick up magnetic objects, Stasis, which allows you to freeze an object in time, and Cryonis, which creates ice pillars out of water. These 4 tools define how you interact with the world. You're constantly on the lookout for metal objects to grab, rocks that can be blown up, things out of reach near bodies of water. What's great is how wide of an application those runes have. One of my favorite shrines in the game is called Rin Oya. I won't get super into it here, but there's at least 3 different solutions to this puzzle. They're all separate and involve coming at the puzzle from a completely different angle. Interestingly, I don't know which of them is the intended solution. They all feel equally correct. And even outside of puzzles, players did crazy shit. How can I talk about players finding their own solutions and not bring up the flying machines? The most popular one comes from placing 2 minecarts in a certain way and grabbing the bottom cart. Link literally picks himself up by his bootstraps and flies away. This, of course, wasn't intended by the developers. But after the game came out, I think the Breath of the Wild team took inspiration from that. In fact, there's an interview from before Tears of the Kingdom came out, where Hidemaru Fujibayashi, the game's director, says they saw videos of players making unconventional vehicles, and it gave them the confidence to work on implementing that in a more official manner. Players love to experiment in Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom fully embraced that. Gone are the 4 runes from Breath of the Wild. You're given access to 4 new abilities. Fuse, which lets you attach materials to Link's arsenal. Rewind, which lets you play back time on objects in motion. Ascend, which lets you rise through a nearby ceiling to the ground above it. And Ultra Hand, which lets you attach objects in the world to other objects. Every single one of those gives more freedom than the runes from Breath of the Wild. Let's break them all down, one by one. Fuse actually replaces a lot of the tools from the last game. Elemental arrows, sledgehammers, axes, these are all gone. Instead, you make them yourself. Combine a branch and a pointy rock and you have an axe. Add some fire fruit to your arrow and you have a fire arrow. The game gives you the materials and asks you to make the weapon you need. You can remove fused parts of a weapon, so you can actually have the same claymore be useful as both an axe and a hammer. It's probably not the most efficient thing in the world, but dadgum, you can do it. Just destroy that axe head and add a hammer head. And it gets way crazier than that. You can add zonai devices to your weapons. Zonai devices are little gadgets that do one specific thing. Flame emitters spew flames. Sleds glide down slopes real well. Fans blow air. I could go on. There's like 24 of these things. And even normal objects in the world can be fused. I remember fusing a minecart to my shield right after getting the ability and thinking it was the funniest thing in the world. But I didn't even think to try shield surfing it down some rails. Look at that, it's like he's riding the cart normally. I only saw this from some gameplay on YouTube, but imagine how my mind would have been blown if I discovered this myself. Fuse is generally used for combat situations, but it's cool to find weird interactions like that. Rewind is the next ability. This is the one I find myself using the least, but I think it's also the one I underestimated the most. That's because it asks you to think in a fundamentally different way than you usually do. Not only do you have to keep what's in front of you in mind, you have to keep the past, present, and future of everything in front of you in mind. You have to think temporally. Something I discovered and made me think I was a genius was rewinding enemy projectiles back at them. Stone taluses will throw boulders at you if you keep your distance, but if you purposefully walk away to bait that attack, then use rewind on the rock he throws, it'll slam into him, doing damage and giving you an opportunity to climb onto his back and do even more damage. The Flux constructs, they have an attack where they fly into the air and throw cubes at you. The weak spot is hidden behind other cubes, so you can't just shoot at it with an arrow. But if you were to get on one of those cubes thrown at you and rewind it, you can just ride on up to the weak point and give it a good old whoopin'. That's actually what the developers intend for you to do during this phase, but even with that, you feel like you're getting one over on them. Or rather, you feel like you're getting one over on the boss. The boss flies up there precisely so Link can't attack it, and it even shields its weak point from bow shots on the ground. It accounts for everything during this fight. Well, except for the fact that Link can reverse objects' motion in time. It took me a few phases of him doing that to realize that's what I was supposed to do, and once I made that realization, I felt so smart. The developers threw in a tiny little puzzle during this mini boss fight. Once you realize you can do that, it feels so obvious, but that little eureka moment where you think to try it, it's great. The Ascend ability is another one that took me a while to get used to. I played so much of Breath of the Wild without being able to zip up through the ceiling. I went through a good chunk of Tears of the Kingdom at first, not even thinking about it. This game introduced wells to the world. You can jump down them and there will be a little cave to explore. I remember, the first one I explored, I didn't know how to get out. You can see me looking around here for a ladder or something. I was baffled that the game would let me jump into this cave and have the only way of escape be through fast travel. And then, as I looked up at the hole I fell down from, it clicked. I didn't even realize I was stumbling into a puzzle when I jumped down this well, but it taught me a valuable lesson, to think outside the box. I think Breath of the Wild got me into the mindset of solely relying on obvious environmental cues for solutions to problems. When you're in a shrine, a place where every single placed object has purpose, a pool of water sticks out. You know you're probably going to have to use Cryonis on that. If you see a metal crate, you're going to have to use Magnesis. Tears of the Kingdom is a lot more freeform. It's a lot easier to notice a pool of water that's out of place than a ceiling. Every interior location has a ceiling. It takes a while for your brain to adjust and realize that going through it is even an option. But once you do, you feel like you're breaking the game. There was a bit in one of the temples where I just randomly flicked on my Ascend ability and saw that I could go up. I noticed that there was a path ahead of me, but I decided to go back and ascend to see what was up there. Lo and behold, it put me in the main room of the temple. It was only after I beat the temple that I came back and went down that path I avoided earlier. You progress through a few rooms and it eventually leads you into the temple's main room. I skipped that little bit of content without even realizing it, and the game let me do it. I think that's beautiful. It feels like you're cheating the game. In the same interview I talked about earlier, Aonuma and Fujibayashi said as much. Fujibayashi reveals that Ascend actually started out as a debug feature. They implemented a code that put them on the surface when they were exploring deep caves. Then they realized it might be fun to let the players have that ability too. He finishes by saying, "And to be blunt and honest, cheating can be fun, so that's why we decided to drop it in there." I love that philosophy. It's the developers recognizing that players will most definitely find solutions and workarounds to problems that they didn't expect. And rather than try to patch them all out, they just let them exist. The game lets you cheat. It gives you the freedom to try whatever solution you can think of. And no tool gives you more freedom than Ultra Hand. Ultra Hand is literally the figure it out yourself tool. There are a bunch of Korok challenges dedicated to you building some contraption with Ultra Hand to get them to their friend. You can build a little car, a glider, a flying machine, or you can just strap him to the back of your horse. You can get as simplistic or as complex as you want. This brings me back to my days of playing Gary's mod, just putting random stuff together and adding wheels to make a vehicle. If you told me back in 2010 that the new Legend of Zelda game would feel like playing Gary's mod, I'd attach thrusters to your chair and launch you into space. Going on YouTube or Twitter and seeing what other people are building, I can't even comprehend what's going on. Where do they even get the idea for these builds? The best part is that you don't need to make any of these crazy devices. You can get away with the simplest of solutions. I came across this chest near a shrine really early on in my playthrough. It was tantalizing seeing a chest completely surrounded by spikes that hurt you if you touch them. It was practically inaccessible. For the average person, but not for me. I spent 10 minutes chopping down trees and attaching their trunks in a way that allowed me to climb over the painful spikes. It was like pulling teeth, trying to combine them in a way that would both keep the logs from rolling off and allowing me to climb up. I struggled to get up there, but by God, I built this weird assemblage of logs and got my gamer ass up there. For my troubles, I was rewarded with a weapon that does 9 damage. Not the best reward, but I probably wasn't meant to spend that long getting up there. Now that I've put like 50 more hours into the game, I can think of so many other solutions. Placing a pine cone in a fire to generate an updraft so I can fly up. Strapping a rocket to a shield so I can fly above the spikes. Fuse a spring to a shield and jump on it. Make a hot air balloon. Fall down from one of the sky islands directly on the chest. I'm sure there's a half dozen other ways. The point is, this experience early in the game got my brain juices flowing. It reinforced that really anything can be a solution to a problem. But the best solutions involve combining abilities. This is where it feels like you're truly pushing the boundaries of the game. Here's an example. On the Great Sky Island, there were parts where I desperately wanted to glide somewhere, but I couldn't get my glider in the air first. For reference, the glider by itself won't move, but if it's free falling, it'll slowly go forward. Where you're first introduced to the glider, there's tracks that slowly let it fall off the platform, giving you time to jump on. But if I'm on some random cliff, how do I get the glider to go off with me on it? Again, it wasn't until watching YouTube videos that I discovered I could use Rewind in conjunction with Ultra Hand. You grab the glider, hold it up in the air where it'll fall down and start its glide, bring it back down in front of you, hop on, and rewind it. Stop the rewind when you're clear of the ground, and off you go. It feels like I'm cheating here. Like, there's obvious parts on the Great Sky Islands where the developers want you to glide from, but is it legal to glide from this cliff? Will I get a citation if I do it here? No? The game lets me do this? Neat. I've skipped so much of the world by teleporting to a sky island and gliding to my destination. So much of the developers' hard work in this game will never be seen by me. And you know what? They're okay with that. I can't think of a game that's deliberately made you feel like you're cheating quite like Tears of the Kingdom. A game that lets you feel like you're breaking it at every corner. What are some moments where you feel like you've broken Tears of the Kingdom? Sound off in the comments. Go watch my video game world tour of Breath of the Wild. It's a great refresher for the world of that game, having played a lot of Tears of the Kingdom recently. Or watch this random video if you've seen that already. Thanks for watching and see you next time.